Welcome. This is Beyond the Darkness, your home for the best in paranormal talk radio. Now 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, here on Podcast One, part of the Jericho Network. You can tune in and hear the best in paranormal talk radio as we talk about ghosts, monsters, myths, legends, and more. This week, we've got it lined up for you. Tomorrow, the day Satan called. Bill Scott will talk to us about a possession and exorcism case that will leave your skin crawling. On Thursday, Dr. Andrew Nichols joins us to discuss witchcraft and magic from a parapsychological aspect and perspective. And then Friday, Sandrea Masas will join us. She'll talk about vanquishing ghosts and demons. That's the lineup this week. Joining us right now on the air is Matt Swayne. And Matt is the author of a new book, Ghosts of Country Music, True Tales of Haunted Honky Tonks and Legendary Specters. Matt Swayne is a journalist who currently works as a research writer at Penn State. And Matt has worked as a reporter and as a music reviewer for several newspapers and online outlets. And he's here with us this evening to share his insights on the new book. Thank you for joining us, Matt.
Thank you very much. I have to say that I'm a real fan of the show, so it's a real honor to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. We appreciate that. I always love talking to somebody that's interested in the paranormal and has an open and balanced mind for these kind of stories and theories. What made you decide to look into Ghosts of Country Music, Tales of Haunted Honky Tonks and Legendary Specters?
Well, there's a long story, and I'll try to abbreviate it as much as I can. But okay. I was born on Halloween. So that sort of started my interest in the field at a very young age. I was always interested in ghost stories and ghost lore, horror movies, and the like. So I was always interested in that. I started writing about it and collecting stories when I was a newspaper writer at a local paper. But how I got into the country music ghost stories is as I was researching my earlier book, the last book I had out was called Haunted Rock and Roll. I would come across little snippets of ghost stories that didn't fit the rock and roll genre, but would have made would make great fodder for a country book. So I started to collect those, and after a while, I had enough to write this book. And also I'm a country music fan. I guess I'm more of a classic country, I guess they call it now, fan. So I really enjoy the music, and I like a lot of the artists that I wrote about. So it's sort of a sequel to Haunted Rock and Roll, but not really.
So what is today's version of classic? Because in most accounts you'd think of Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline, Loretta Lynn is kind of the classic. But, it's been such a long time, too. You've got guys like George Strait and Lyle Lovett and some of these other guys that have popped up through the last 20 years that they're still pretty classic. I mean, is the classic countryside expanding in artists as time goes along?
Well, that actually is true. So you have the classics, which are more of the traditional country, as you mentioned, Johnny Cash, Hank Williams. Those are the classic. Then you have what sort of an era in country music called the New Traditionalist, which is Lyle Lovett, Dwight Yoakam, who harken back to that. But now we have country music seems to have more of a rock tinge, even sort of a hip hop tinge to it. So it's not my favorite, but I'm always I see guys coming out like Chris Stapleton who are going back to the roots of country music. So there's always hopeful signs.
We had you visit with us on Darkness Radio talking about the ghosts of rock and roll. For listeners that are new to our show and maybe didn't get a chance to hear that show, let's just just give me one or two of your very favorite ghost stories that you featured in the first book regarding rock and roll ghosts and legends.
Sure. Well, I really enjoyed writing the chapter about Led Zeppelin. And Jimmy Page, particularly, who lived in a house called Bulliskin House in Scotland.
Right.
And that house was preeminently haunted. It was haunted by kind of the master himself, Aleister Crowley, who lived there for years and apparently also performed a lot of the spells there, wrote a lot about the occult there. And one of the stories that always struck me as kind of fascinating is that Jimmy Page had told people that there was a beheading in the house and he had a guest stay overnight, and the guest heard this kind of rumpling around back and forth on the floor, and he thought it was the cats. So he went to the caretaker the next morning and said, "Hey, could you please leave the cats out? They're driving me crazy at night." And he said, "Well, there were no cats there." And then the caretaker proceeded to tell this guy the story about the beheading that took place in Bulliskin House, and that what he heard was a decapitated head rolling down the hallway. So, but the thing that really fascinated me was this took place during an interview. Jimmy Page was recounting this story, and of course the reporter is skeptical and said, "Well, maybe anytime you're dealing with the rock and roll stories, you might think maybe drugs and alcohol are involved."
Right.
So he said that this guy was completely straight at the time. And then the reporter asked Jimmy Page if he ever heard this sound of this decapitated head rolling down the hall. And Jimmy Page said no. And then the reporter said, "So you don't believe that it's haunted, or you don't believe in the paranormal?" And he said, "I didn't say that. I said I just never heard the head roll down the hall." That was, one of my favorite stories. I really liked writing that book because I liked researching about Robert Johnson and all the legends about the Crossroads. So all of those stories are in there. What I found is that there are just as many ghost stories in the country genre, but there's no heads rolling down the halls of most of the country stories.
Last year was pretty brutal on the rock and roll industry for loss of musicians' lives. I mean, it was epic in proportion with how many rock and rollers died. Have you started to collect stories? Have any of the legends started to appear again? Has Bowie or George Michael or Glenn Frey shown up in any ghost stories that you found?
You know me too well. I have been collecting those, and I'm going to work on a sequel. Probably late next year, I'll start work on that. But there are stories that Prince is haunting the studios that he made famous. I haven't really heard any ghost stories about David Bowie, but through researching and looking for these stories about David Bowie, what I found is a lot of occult lore going on with Bowie that I was not familiar with. That he was thoroughly involved in the occult and magic particularly. So I'm going to try to put that all together and come up with a second volume and see if I can sell it to the publisher.
As fate would have it, Friday night I will be at a special gathering at Paisley Park Studios.
Oh my gosh.
The home of Prince.
I'm going to interview you.
We're going to do a tour of the museum and get a chance to participate in a dance party that's taking place there at Paisley Park Studios. Both Tim and I will be there, and I've already thought I'm going to bring my recorder in just to stick in my pocket, roll it as we're going through the museum, and see if I capture any kind of weird phenomena while we're there. Because
I would love to.
Yeah, what a crazy opportunity.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you about that afterwards. But I have heard that there are some staff members who say that Prince is still there. And there's also some really interesting things, how he died in the elevator and the famous lyric, "Don't let the elevator bring you down."
Right.
So there's all sorts of stuff that maybe isn't really connected to the ghost side of things. But again, it really emphasizes that supernatural connection that rock stars seem to have, with the supernatural.
I'm curious, when you were doing your research on the rock and roll book, looking at stories like Jim Morrison, there are people that firmly believe Morrison did, in effect, fake his own death. And I know Ray Manzarek, in once in a drunken interview, admitted it and then recanted the admission. I'm good friends with Henry Diltz, who did the Morrison Hotel album cover. And I don't feel like I'm betraying him, because he said this at a live concert and convention that I was a part of back in the 80s. But he told me he firmly believes that Jim is alive and claims to even have pictures of him in France after his reported death.
Wow.
So, you know, when you hear stories like this and then look at the Jim Morrison lore, are there many ghost stories surrounding these infamous characters that are reportedly faking their own deaths?
That actually comes up quite a bit in the rock and roll ghost lore, and it makes it much more difficult to research. For instance, Elvis, there was a famous picture after Elvis died.
Right.
I think it was in the I think right by the pool house.
Right, the meditation gardens area, right?
Yeah, exactly. And when you look at it, you could say, well, it was Elvis. He faked his own death and he was, just there. Some people said, well, that's the ghost of Elvis. Other people said there are so many Elvis impersonators. And then there's a fourth level that anytime Elvis went out and bought a pair of sunglasses, his Memphis Mafia went out and bought the same pair. So they all tried to emulate him. So there's kind of 4 layers to these stories. And when I researched some of the Jim Morrison stories, that did pop up too. And if you remember in kind of the way Jim was and Jim's mental state at that time, he was in a lot of legal trouble. He was looking at maybe even some hard time in a Florida prison. And also, I think he had kind of given up on the whole rock and roll star gig. So, I guess I'm not convinced that I do think he died, but, there's enough evidence, there's enough conjecture out there to make you think twice about it, though.
I always thought what was fascinating, I love Oliver Stone's The Doors movie. And I always thought what was really kind of intriguing and insightful at the end, it says, it is said that on this day, Jim Morrison died.
Right.
And then 2 years later, Pamela joined him. And I thought that was a really interesting way to say that. It wasn't, on this day, Jim Morrison was reported dead. It is said, something like that Jim Morrison died on this day. And then he doesn't say Pamela died 2 years later. It says 2 years later, she joined him.
Right.
And I thought, boy, that's just a really weird way for Oliver Stone to kind of pose that situation. And I was a huge fan of 80s in the movies. And I got to be honest with you, 2 of my favorites were Eddie and the Cruisers and Eddie and the Cruisers 2. And boy, if that feels like they're ripping off the Jim Morrison story right there. The whole idea of this guy coming up and the heavy rock and roller. And then they start getting into the transcendental, more experimental rock, and suddenly he passes away, and this legendary album, does it exist, doesn't it exist? And it felt very Doors-like. So I think that's part of what drives this fascination. We just don't want to see our legends go.
Yeah, and it also comes up with Kurt Cobain, too. There was the legend that he's still alive. And then there's the legend that he was murdered. But I think you have nailed one of the reasons why these celebrities seem to always pass from the life into this ghost lore and the ghost stories that are involved with that.
I grew up in Illinois, and I grew up in a town called Medina. We were right down the road from the Chicago O'Hare Airport. Between my house and the airport was a little bar called Nashville North.
Okay.
And it was a great little bar. And my best friend that I grew up with, Rick, was a singer, and they had open mic nights. And they never carded us. We could go in there. I can say this now because they've torn the place down. and the owners are gone. But Archie and Marlene that owned it and their daughter Kim would let us in, and we would have beer and we would sing songs and we'd have a great time. And they would tell me about some of the weird things that were going on there. And I'll tell you what, I was always open to the idea of the paranormal, but I've been in some honky tonk bars. I've been in some places like this where you definitely get the vibe that it's got a lot more going on than just the living that are sitting there listening to music, and the energies you could feel in some of these bars. It was phenomenal to be a part of that and witness it. And I didn't grow up a country western fan. I grew up a fan of my friend Rick, who happened to sing a lot of country western standards, and Hank Williams Jr. and Johnny Cash and a lot of that. And I used to love to go to listen to him perform. But to sit around and listen to some of these guys and some of the legends, and on occasion meet some of these musicians that were parts of bands, It was really an amazing time of my life. As a matter of fact, Rick got an opportunity to go for John Capps and go to Nashville to record a single, and I accompanied him. DJ Fontana, who was the drummer for Elvis, right, for a number of years, showed up to the recording studio and was there. That's
crazy.
And what was fun is at one point I'm sitting in the studio and Rick gets out and sings, and he's got this great voice, and as they're listening they had to stop him because John Capps, the producer, said, "Hey boy, you got to get Elvis out of you and you got to sing your own way." And right. And his drummer, DJ, looks over at me and he goes, "That was really creepy." He goes, "I've heard a lot of Elvis impersonators in my life." He goes, "This kid isn't impersonating Elvis. He's Elvis. This voice is amazing." And I always thought that was pretty neat that he was picking up on the fact my buddy wasn't going out there knocking out the voice that just came from him. But he said that even gave him the chills, as like he had seen Elvis in person again, that kind of ghosty visage. So I got involved in the country world by accident, doing these things. Yeah. But I could tell you, boy, you listen to some of the classic country music, it's filled with so much emotion and, ups and downs. You could see where that kind of energy would definitely leave an imprint and a haunting to follow, especially with some of these legendary singers.
Yeah, that's exactly what I found. And just a little bit of history as I'm researching haunted rock and roll, the whole time, it very quickly for me goes from, I'm just really trying to find cool, entertaining stories that are compelling and, come from credible sources, or at least is very good ghost lore that a lot of people know about and talk about. So that's what I'm looking for. But the whole time I was writing haunted rock and roll, the question was always, why is rock and roll so haunted? And, and by the time I was done with that book, I had some pretty good theories about that. But then I started to go into the country music book, and I was picking up a lot of the same kind of stories that you talk about the energy involved. And now I've kind of, and then I even started looking at music much earlier than that, and I would find ghost stories of supernatural encounters. And I now have more of a theory that music itself is a kind of spiritual technology. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds a little weird.
Not at all.
But if you look at any religious service, all religions somehow try to incorporate music into their services.
Right.
Whether it's Bach fugues, whether it's chanting, drumming, all of those religions use that as a tool. And I don't think secular music is really any different. And if you look at it, rock and roll kind of goes back to gospel and blues and even country and western. Right. Country and western definitely has a connection to gospel. And so when you think about it, it shouldn't be so surprising that this music moves people in such ways that either if you do believe in this supernatural plane, that somehow they're connecting to it, or that energy brings out the creativity to keep and sustain folklore and mythology alive. And beyond that, you just have these people that are larger than life. Hank Williams, Elvis Presley, Patsy Cline. They're all just so big that it's almost impossible to contain them in one lifetime. And that's kind of what I got with that.
And Matt, the magic of music, and I don't want that to sound like an overly used thematic idea, but there is a magic to music. How many of you can listen to a song and you're instantly transported back to a specific time and place in your life? Whether it's, I can hear the safety dance and I'm back on my bus heading to high school, every time, because I heard that song on the radio constantly when I was on the bus, and I can smell the bus. I can feel the vibration of the bus. It's like I'm there. There are certain songs, Purple Rain, for instance, where I can smell the moldy basement of my friends' houses as we would have these weekend parties, these epic dance parties, and cuddling and making out with your girl and listening to this music. And it inspires, it sparks this imagery in your mind. And I think that's the closest thing to actual time travel people will ever experience are these triggers from music.
That's very interesting. And I don't think I've ever really thought about it that way, but it's absolutely correct. The other thing that I was exploring on whether adding a little bit to the book about just neurologically speaking, when you listen to music, it is kind of a full brain activity. Mm-hmm. You have an analytical side of your brain that's involved with the frequencies, especially if you're actually playing it. And on the other hand, you have the creative side too that's involved. So your whole brain is kind of involved with music. So I was wondering whether I should add more about that, but I didn't want to bore too many people.
No, I think that's a fascinating aspect to it, that what are we awakening, this kind of primal connection? And I've gone to haunted locations where, I'll be honest with you, we went to a haunted honky tonk, and we used this reverse EVP machine that Bill Chappell had created, where you record the music, you plug this into the headphone jack, and then you push play. And what it does is it broadcasts it not audibly, but into the electromagnetic atmosphere. The same place that we're recording EVP from. And we went in and we were pumping out some really hardcore, like thrash metal and running a recorder. Mm-hmm. And it was funny when we turned it off, you could hear this voice say, "Please stop that racket."
Are you serious?
Yes.
Wow.
And here we were bombarding the area with music because, again, music gets it. Now, Billy Tolley from the TV show Ghost Adventures has a really interesting piece of audio where he set up recorder playing old honky-tonk piano in one of the old bars. It might have even been the Washoe Club, and set up recorders around the room. Later on, when he came back, you're hearing the piano music, the old-time kind of rinky-dink piano music going on in the background, but you hear this cacophony of voices singing along like it's an old bar room, and everybody's singing with this music. And you can't deny it. And it's, look, even on the other side, it's inspiring, and you're blasting them with this era music, and it brings them up or irritates them or excites them and creates energy. And I believe in music on a paranormal investigation a lot because I do think that it stirs emotions, memories. And when you start those synapses and connections, I think anything's possible when it comes to investigating using that technology and that kind of energy to kick things into high gear.
Oh, absolutely. The other thing that I noticed right away is if you watch Elvis in concert, there's very little difference between the crowd reaction to Elvis and let's say a revival meeting. It's right. And I think you've probably been in concerts. I've been in concerts. I've played music, and there are times when you just you don't really feel connected to this plane of existence. You do feel something much greater is moving through you.
Yeah, we transcend.
Yeah, and that's what music is. It's a vehicle for transcension, and there is absolutely it shouldn't be as surprising either that so many of these artists, especially the musicians, were also great poets. They're tapping into something that's a lot deeper than what we do tap into every day. I mean, there's a reason I'm writing about rock stars and country stars and not, haunted accountants or something like that.
And the other thing that's really fascinating about music is the power that it holds in our lives, and how many people have told you, Matt, that I was looking for a sign today. I wanted a sign from my mom, from my dad, my brother, my sister, my grandpa. And I turned on the radio and a song I haven't heard in 20 years came on. And that was the song my grandpa always used to sing to me. And there are those triggers. I've mentioned it in the past on my show, Darkness Radio, and mentioning it real quickly here again. I had one of the most transcendent moments of my life twice, and they both dealt with music. I was very suicidal as a teenager, dealing with this dark moment in my life. I had this huge falling out with my friends, with my girl, and had never felt so completely alone before. I was unhappy with who I am, everything. And I went to commit suicide, put the gun in my mouth, pulled the trigger, and it refused to fire. Safety was off, everything. 3 shots at it, nothing worked. And then I saw my headlights from my dad's car pan into the living room, and I thought, I can't be that guy. I can't let him hear the crack of the gun and know that he was that close to being here to stop me. So I put the gun away. I went down into my room. In the dark, I turned on my stereo, put on my headphones, and there, blaring in my ears, was Bruce Springsteen's Dancing in the Dark. And wow. I didn't think about it. I just listened, and I was angry, and I just let the music marinate. And it got over, and some crap song came over, so I spun the dial, and there it was again. Dancing in the Dark started, so I listened to it again. And it came on, I think it was 5 or 6 times in a row on different stations, staggered. And it was all of a sudden around one of the last times I heard it that night. Matt, it was one of the most profound moments. It was as if somebody took their hands off my head, like my ears were muted. Although I could hear the music and I could hear the rhythm, I wasn't hearing the message. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there feeling so dark and so lonely and so isolated from the world. And as we are as teenagers, and when we're in this blue funk, no matter what age we are, right? We're the only one that's ever felt this feeling. We're the only one that could ever know this kind of pain.
Right.
And I was so wallowing in that, in this weird moment, almost like when your ears clear when you get off a plane and you get that kind of feel and you can hear again. I get this clearing and I start hearing these lyrics. And he starts talking about being a young man who can't stand the look of his own face or the clothes that he wears or the life that he leads. And his life is backwards. He's getting up every night and he's going to sleep every day. And he's just in this dark place. And I'm like, yeah, exactly. That's it. That's my life. And then all of a sudden the last words of the song start to resound to me. You can't start a fire sitting around crying with a broken heart, right? You can't start a fire worrying about your little world falling apart. And all of a sudden I'm like, no, this is a stupid pop song. What am I hearing? I'm hearing this message come through to me. And I heard it over and over 5, 6 times that night. It just kept playing. By the time it was over, I was bawling. And all of a sudden I had that sensation of feeling so lonely and isolated removed because I was no longer alone in this. I heard the words of New Jersey's son, Bruce Springsteen, singing what my heart felt and what my soul was commiserating in. And I realized this man's been through this. He knew this pain and he didn't give in. And here he is today performing around the world, making other people feel better and giving you an insight into pain is real. There's nothing we can do about pain. You can choose to let it overwhelm you, or you can stand up, shake off the dust, and, set the world on fire. That saved my life that night. I have no doubt about it that the great Lord of rock and roll spoke to my ears, and it changed my life. And, wow. And that was a powerful moment for me. And there was a time that I was going through a religious crisis of God, are you even there? And I'm having this conversation, Matt, in my car, and I'm yelling out to God, and I'm like, where are you when this is going on? Where were you when this happened? Why is this so bad? And I said, I feel like you're not there, or if you're there, you're mocking me. You've left me alone. There's nothing for me. I need proof. And the whole time my radio's on. And there's a song that I've loved since it came out, and I'm not paying attention to it. And as I'm getting angrier, all of a sudden, it's like the music keeps filling my car. And I'm getting angry as this beautiful, soft, melodic song is filling my car. And I finally stop being angry, and I look at the receiver of the car as it's playing. And as I keep saying to myself, where are you? Why don't you give me proof? There's the voice of Cyndi Lauper coming through my radio. And she's singing Time After Time. Time After Time. And she keeps saying, if you're lost, you can look and you will find me time after time. And these lines right at that moment, it was as though the hands came off my ears again, and these lyrics poured into me, and I started bawling. And I was like, I'm asking for a sign. Where are you? And all of a sudden I hear, and that's the exact line that came out. If you're lost and you look, then you will find me time after time. And it just kept repeating. Right. And that was the power of music. And that's why it's always been so important to me. So I love the idea that you can go look into these stories of country and rock and roll and share the powers, because again, I think that's important for people to realize there is power in what we can do with this music, and it speaks to our souls. No matter what type of music you're into, it moves you, and that's good. And that reminds us that we're alive. And I think that's why people don't want to let go of our musical heroes, right? Of any hero, because they resonate, and that music is no longer new, and it's no longer there for us when we need it most.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's for sure. And just look at the reaction when Prince died. Look at the reaction when David Bowie died, that outpouring of grief. But yet that music still is with us. And I heard so many of my friends, and I think I was the same way, who reached back into that music. That music is, and the pain and the salvation that it brings, and it really is eternal. I think that's why these stories are so profound. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, I always tell people that these are social facts. These are really important to maintain and understand. I mean, a lot of the ghost stories that I've researched for my book on haunted universities, they actually go back almost 100 years or so. So there has to be something that keeps us interested in this field and maintains it over centuries. In haunted rock and roll, you have ghost stories that have lasted now almost a half century. We just passed February 3rd, which was the day the music died. And there's ghost stories that are popping up about the crash that Buddy Holly died in. Still to this day, people are experiencing those things.
Right. People that have visited that area have heard cries.
Yep.
They've seen what appears to be Buddy Holly standing there in the area where the rubble was. So there's been a lot of interesting stories. Before we dig into the country western ghost stories here, and ghosts of country music, were there any scary ghost stories when it came to the rock and rollers?
I thought pretty much the Led Zeppelin ones were, but of the actual rock stars, I can't say so. Most of those were pretty benign. There was this story that was a little creepy that happened in Jim Morrison's childhood home. The one woman claimed she was in bed, and she heard a noise. She woke up. It stirred her awake. She looked up, and there was the ghost of Jim Morrison in her bedroom. And it was Jim, but it had sort of a silver blue glow around him. And she closed her eyes again, hoping he would go away. And she felt something crawl in bed with her. And she turned her head, and Jim Morrison was there. I don't find that especially. I mean, if it happened to me, it would spook me out. But that's about as close to. I don't even know whether there's any kind of malignant ones out there. There's a few about Black Sabbath that what the story was there. The Geezer Butler, apparently Ozzy Osbourne stole a book on magic and gave it to Geezer Butler, and that night he was haunted by this really dark spirit. So that was kind of creepy too, but it wasn't like he was haunted by Jimi Hendrix or something like that.
Right. It's funny too. You talk about the ghost climbing in bed with the woman that she believed was Jim Morrison's ghost. And I don't know if you cover this in your rock and roll book, but Dan Aykroyd owned the former house of Mama Cass from the Mamas and the Papas. And off the cuff remark he'd made about the fact that he believes that he felt a woman climb in bed with him while he was living in that house, and kind of remarked and joked about, was it Mama Cass?
Right. There's another aspect of that is that, when I did cover that in the Haunted Rock and Roll book, and I thought, well, maybe Dan was just joking around, but actually Beverly D'Angelo had some very strange things happen in that very house as well. And in her case, she actually saw jewelry moving up and down the coffee table.
And she still lives there, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, Beverly D'Angelo. I think it's been owned by so many people. It was crazy when I did the provenance on it, looking into it for research for a TV show, and realizing how many celebrities lived in that house at one point or another. It's amazing. Well, let's do this. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back and we'll get into the ghosts of country music, tales of haunted honky tonks, and legendary specters.
Beyond the darkness.
All right, we're back on Beyond the Darkness. Remember, go do that survey for me at podcast1.com. Click on the survey banner. Remember also, I'm going to be hosting Coast to Coast AM This coming Saturday night, we're going to take a really interesting look at paranormal investigating. John Sable is our guest, and he's going to share some electronic voice phenomena that will blow you away. He does this amazing kind of archaeological ghost hunts where he peels back the layers of time and directly talks to certain and specific aspects of that history. And the responses, I think, are going to blow your mind. So make sure you check that out. That's this Saturday from midnight till 4 a.m. Central. So it's late night Saturday, early morning Sunday. You want more information? Check out coasttocoastam.com/stations to find stations in your area and ways to listen. And it is Valentine's Day. Give the gift to yourself of love and the best in overnight talk radio. You can sign up there and become a Coast Insider so you never miss another minute of the best in overnight talk radio. It's about 15 cents a day for a 1-year subscription. Gives you 5 years of past archived shows, gives you access to George Norrie, the other hosts of Coast to Coast, and some exclusive content right on his site. And I'm going to do this quick mention for our buddy George as well. It's Valentine's Day. If you're looking to find that love of your life and you're tired of sitting around waiting for her or him to show up at your door, it's time you take it into your own hands. Go check out paranormaldate.com and start your life. Remember, paranormaldate.com. You love what you hear on this show. You love what you hear on Coast to Coast AM. That's the kind of people you want to meet because they're going to have similar interests, likes, and dislikes. So you can go sign up for paranormaldate.com. They have over 50,000 members. Your best friend or the love of your life could be right around the corner. Go check out paranormaldate.com and be a part of it. Tonight, we're celebrating Valentine's with music, and we're going to do that now. Matt Swayne is here. We talked a little bit about rock and roll ghosts and some of the interesting history and a couple of my own stories. Let's get into ghosts of country music, tales of haunted honky tonks and legendary specters. One thing I want to start off with, because as soon as I mentioned we were going to do the show, everybody and their brother wants to know what your thoughts are on Bobby Mackey's Music World. What can you tell us about that legendary haunted honky tonk?
Well, Bobby Mackey's, for me, stood out because it was so unlike most of the other country ghost stories that I covered in this book. Because, as I said, most of the country stories don't have heads, decapitated heads rolling down the halls. In Bobby Mackey's, there actually is a decapitated head that appears in at least some of the ghost lore around that nightclub. But for that story, I actually reached out to a team of ghost hunters that lead a lot of the tours of the club and got their input to the stories. But from what I understand, there seems to be several layers to the haunting there. There is a story that there was a victim murdered in the club itself, and that she's haunting the club. But then there's also stories about demonic activity. There's at least one account of somebody becoming possessed at that nightclub, and there's some other stories about just some plain ghost stories. Now, when I talked to the ghost hunters, they weren't sure that there was any type of demonic entity haunting the place. They found most of the activity was kind of benign. They felt now there was one case where one of the ghost hunters told me that something had thrown stones or pebbles at them, but seemed to be more like trying to reach out to them. So I found Bobby Mackey's very interesting. There are a lot of detractors out there too, a lot of skeptics about the activity. But for me, it was one of the more fascinating stories that I covered for this book.
If you don't mind, I'm going to share a quick anecdote from being at Bobby Mackey's myself. And for those of you listening with your family and little ones, you might want to avoid or skip over this story because I'll use a little salty language. But I'd gone there investigating with the Ghost Adventures crew. And they were filming some of it. We had gone there with Bishop James Long, and he was all fire and brimstone down in that basement by the pit to hell, and was sprinkling holy water all over, tore off his collar, and was challenging whatever dark entities were down there. Now, I'd been there before. I'd never felt anything dark or malevolent, nothing evil or frightening, but it definitely felt like there was something there. I heard footsteps. I had the bathroom, the little door in there slam when I was in the bathroom taking a leak. So, there was some kind of weird activity going on. But what I thought was really intriguing was at one point, there's the pit to hell, the deal. And I decided, well, I'm going to step into it. And Mark and Debbie Constantino and Nick Roth were with me, and we were leading this ghost hunt. And I stepped into the pit to hell with my recorder thinking, I got to feel something, right? This is the pit to hell. Supposedly this is the well where the head was hidden or something, and that this is a portal. So I wanted to go in there and feel something. And we're getting nothing. And Debbie's standing directly in the pit with me. Unfortunately, the Constantinos passed a few years ago, but this was, one of the more memorable moments. Doing what we do, you don't run into a whole bunch of holy shit moments anymore, right?
Right.
And we're standing in this pit to hell, and I decide we're getting nothing on EVP. I start running a Shack Hack, one of the audio boxes, and and we're picking up, and we're down in the basement, far away from anything, and I'm getting some weird stuff, but nothing major. And then I call out and I say, what did you think of Bishop James Long? And it starts saying, fake fraud. Meanwhile, upstairs, people are also asking questions, and the audio equipment, their SB7s and the PX devices, and I'm trying to remember the Ovilus, all kept calling out fake priest. And it was strange, right, going on at the same time. And I look at Debbie, and this is where it gets a little saltier. I go, oh, you didn't like when Bishop Long was down here? And this dark voice comes over the radio and filled the room. You hear the static from the radio doing the ch-ch-ch-ch-ch-ch. Suddenly this voice goes, fucking faggot.
Oh, wow.
And all of us turned to each other and we were like, whoa, did you just hear that? And that's not something you're just going to hear over a radio. Now, I understand when you're listening to the radio box, you might hear, it's 72 degrees, it's sunny, it's cloudy, there's a car accident on 394, but you're not going to hear those two words together just blasting over a radio as we discussed it. No. And that was really disturbing for all of us. And we're like, all right, this seems to be getting irritated. Let's get out of here. So we kind of break down. Well, there was a group of my friends that were staying in that area, and they'd gone in there, and they had one of the PX devices going, and they're trying to communicate with the spirits. And they're like, is there anything we can do? And I said, all right, I'll see you guys later. And I start walking out of the room. And as I'm walking out of the room, the PX device starts saying, Schrader.
Wow.
Schrader. And it's not supposed to repeat itself like that. And I turn around and I go, did that just say my name? And they're all like, yeah, I think so. And I walk back over and I go, okay, I'm here. What do you want? And you hear it very clearly. It just goes, pray. And it was silent.
Wow.
So we all took hands. We did a prayer of closing there, trying to find any spirits that were lost or forgotten or hurt, wounded, whatever, trying to call them up. And the whole time the box is just kind of doing the no words are coming out of it. And we're done. And I just stopped. I looked up and I go, well, I hope that helps. And as I walk out the door, the only other word that comes through is you hear joy.
Wow.
And that was it. So Bobby Mackey's had a definite weird vibe going on there while we were there. And, I can't discount what my experiences were, but it was weird.
Well, when I looked into it, and there's actually a book about the haunting, there were so many affidavits signed by people who had encounters there. I think Bobby Mackey's wife was attacked, pushed down steps there. It was of all the country ghost stories, it's most thoroughly documented by far.
And it's one of the more darker and nefarious places, it seems. When you're doing your research, what other places, haunted honky tonks or legendary country theaters, really jumped out at you?
I think the Ryman Auditorium stands out to me as probably one of the most haunted places in country music. And it's usually referred to as the mother church of country music, kind of for a reason. And a lot of people don't know the real reason, but the Ryman was built by Captain Thomas Ryman, who originally was not a great guy. He was apparently involved in gambling and prostitution. And there was a preacher, and I'm blanking on the preacher's name right now, but he came to Nashville to convert a lot of the souls there. And Thomas Ryman pretty much did everything to try to get the guy out of his business. And he was apparently converting a lot of people, which was affecting the captain's bottom line. So he went to one of the services apparently to heckle the preacher, and he ended up converting. And the story goes that he built the Ryman Auditorium mainly for exclusively for religious services and religious music. And when it converted to a secular music, there are stories that that's one of the reasons why the Ryman is so haunted, that the captain haunts it. And the one story is that during one performance of secular music, and it was apparently kind of a saucy song, the audience heard what sounded like explosions going off in the hall. It got so loud that it drowned out the band that was playing at the time, who pretty much quit on stage. It sounded like the Ryman was going to be ripped apart. And so everyone basically said that was the captain expressing his displeasure. There's also the story of the Gray Man, who may or may not be related to Captain Ryman. The Gray Man has been seen all through the hall, and sometimes even performers who are playing on stage or rehearsing on stage will see this strange person in gray, sometimes sitting all alone in one of the chairs. After the rehearsal, to go out to talk to the person to see who it is, and there's no one there. So those are some of the stories. The Ryman is also reportedly haunted by Hank Williams, and also Patsy Cline is supposed to make a couple appearances there as well. So I would have to say that the Ryman Auditorium is one of those places that is rumored to be the most haunted.
What are the stories surrounding Patsy Cline and Hank Williams Jr. at the Ryman?
Well, the Hank Williams is sometimes considered the gray ghost there too, the man in gray. But the one story that stands out is that a staff member, an interesting thing about Hank Williams is there is almost, and his ghost appears all over the South and in so many different places that are important to country music. But there is always a mist involved with his apparitions. And in the Ryman, the story goes that a staff member said she was cleaning up late at night and she saw this mist going towards the stage. And everybody else had said that was one of the ghost stories involved with the Ryman. So this lady wasn't like me, who would have probably ran the other way. She actually kept getting closer and closer. And she said as she got closer, this mist turned from, kind of this amorphous cloud into a human being. And then as she got closer, she said it looked a lot like Hank Williams. It was a tall, lanky figure, looking like he was singing into a microphone on stage. So that's the story about Hank. Patsy is seen outside, a lot of times milling with crowds. People have said that they've seen someone who looks exactly like Patsy Cline. And, of course, skeptics will say, well, it could have been a lookalike or someone who just resembled her. But the staff members also say they have seen Patsy Cline's ghost late at night when other people shouldn't be in the hall at all.
Have any celebrities come forward and said that they've had experiences with some of these country western legends?
I will say that I can't say that they have come and said they've seen these ghosts, but I know that several songs have been written about Hank Williams' ghost. Alan Jackson wrote a song, and David Allan Coe wrote a song about how they visited the grave in Montgomery, Alabama, the grave of Hank Williams. And I think even sometimes they mention this Mr. Fogg, because that keeps on coming up in the hauntings in Montgomery as well.
Fascinating. Let's dip into some of the other locations. The Grand Ole Opry. Now, I've heard that is definitely off the charts haunted.
Right. And the Grand Ole Opry is the music show, and it used to be in the Ryman Auditorium.
Right. The original.
But then I think in the 70s, it moved to Opryland. So this didn't make the book, and this is one of the things that always makes me mad about writing books. You always find things out after it's
right.
Shipped off to the publisher. But in this case, they said that they took some boards out of the original stage and took them out to Opryland. And so a lot of the ghosts that are in Ryman are also made the transition to Opryland. So there are stories about in Opryland about the ghost of Hank Williams being there and people hearing him singing late at night, and then they can never locate the location of the person singing it, and it sounds exactly like Hank Williams. The other story is Roy Acuff, who really credits the Grand Ole Opry, the radio show, as being so key to his career, and he loved that show, and he wasn't probably thrilled that it was moving from the Ryman, but he went out to Opryland and actually had a home there, and kind of made that show his own out there. So now they say the home that he lived in is haunted, and the workers there, it's a museum. And I have to be careful here because when I started writing the book, Opryland had been besieged by a couple different disasters, including a flood. So I'm not, and then later on they were talking about reopening it. So I'm not exactly sure of the status there. But at the time, workers were saying that they've had things disappear. They heard footsteps going up and down the halls when no one was supposed to be there. And they're pretty sure that it was Roy Acuff because the haunting started soon after he died, and the house was pretty quiet prior to that. So he's another celebrity ghost out there.
Who seems to be the most active of the country western specters?
It definitely would be Hank Williams. Hank Williams' ghost appears. We mentioned Ryman, but I could also talk about Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, where he apparently holds forth. The alley between Ryman and Tootsie's, and during my research period here, apparently the stars would play at the Ryman, and then they would, kind of walk down the alley to Tootsie's and have a drink or two, or for Hank, more than that.
Right.
But supposedly he haunts the alley. And one of the stories that appears about Hank Williams is his legendary death ride. I don't know whether too many people know about that, but it would almost be comic if it wasn't so tragic. But he got his manager arranged a gig in Ohio. The only trouble was Hank was in Alabama. So he hired a driver to take him from Alabama to Ohio. And the other thing that I found out during my research here is that Hank Williams actually had spinal bifida. And I always just thought he was this kind of rebel, this, hard drinking country singer. But actually he was in a lot of pain for most of his life. And apparently his addiction to pills and alcohol was based on that. So he left from Alabama, and I think the pain got too much for him, and he wanted to take a plane in Knoxville, Tennessee. The plane was diverted back, and I've heard two different stories. I heard that he caused so much of a ruckus on the plane that they forced him off. The other one was that there was just bad weather conditions, so that he was forced to stay in a hotel in Knoxville. The other story is that he got kicked out of there because he was causing a ruckus there. But in any event, he and his driver drove from Knoxville, Tennessee up to West Virginia. And at a certain point in West Virginia, the driver stopped to get gas. And when the gas station attendant came out, noticed that Hank Williams didn't seem responsive, and he actually died in that car. So from that point on, I found ghost stories all along that legendary ride of death. The hotel that he stayed in was I don't think it's a hotel anymore, but there were stories there that he haunted that place. People saw that, lanky, tall figure walking up the halls late at night. believed it was Hank Williams. The gas station, people have from that area have seen Hank Williams, the ghost of Hank Williams there too, as well as I think Hank literally, his body went from the gas station to a nearby funeral home, and the ghost has been seen there as well. So he is really, really active, probably the most active spirit in country music.
All right. What about the man in black, Johnny Cash? I've heard fringe stories from people that claim that they've had encounters with Johnny Cash. Where is his ghost making its appearance most often?
Johnny Cash is really interesting for a bunch of reasons, but prior to writing this book, I always thought of Johnny Cash.
Mm-hmm.
I always looked at Johnny Cash as, I remember great gospel music, and I always thought of him, I think he even wrote a book about St. Paul. But what I found out was Johnny Cash was heavily involved in spiritualism, probably in the late 50s, early 60s, with a bunch of his friends, Johnny Horton, Merle Kilgore, and this interesting figure that comes up time and time again when you're talking about those three, Bernard Ricks, who I consider them the paranormal partnership of country music. So Johnny Cash actually was very involved in the supernatural, and he is one of the, I can't say few, but he's one of the country celebrities who claimed he saw a ghost. And really the kind of epicenter for Johnny Cash hauntings is this place called Cinnamon Hill in Jamaica. And his story is, which I found fascinating because this was in a biography, he would go to this island home that was kind of his getaway. And he said that there was a group of friends and family at his house, apparently about 6 of them. They were having a dinner party, and the doors to the dining room were closed. And a woman actually appeared through the dining room doors, walked by the guests, and went out the kitchen door, or out the double doors on the opposite side of the room. And Johnny Cash said the doors were all closed. The woman appeared to be from a different era. Her hairstyle was different. And he was actually very descriptive that she had a full-length white dress. So Johnny Cash was familiar with the supernatural. Now, when he passed, a lot of people have claimed to have seen his ghost in Cinnamon Hill, or at least had encounters that they thought were related to Johnny Cash, as well as June Carter Cash, his wife.
What other famous celebrity ghosts have made their presence known in the country western realm?
I also think Patsy Cline is probably the second most prolific country ghost. And there are a few stories about her. She haunts Tootsie's. And there are a few different stories that seem to indicate she is behind the haunting. But there is also a figure called, her name is Tootsie Bess, and she was the original owner of Tootsie's Orchid Lounge, this place right very close to Ryman. It's legendary in country music history. It's probably integral in a lot of the careers of some of the most famous country stars. But Patsy's story is that if the group is especially good that night, or the singer is especially good, she appears at the end of the bar. Other people say that's Tootsie Bess. But one thing I liked about Patsy Cline is when I was researching her spirit when she was alive was really a bold kind of take charge spirit. And at this time, country music was definitely a guys type thing. But Patsy Cline was not afraid to mix it up with the guys at Tootsie's after hours. And she was always calling everybody Hoss. That was one of the things she was known for, calling all her drinking buddies Hoss, except Elvis. She always called him Big Hoss. But in Tootsie's, every once in a while, people will say they hear someone call them Hoss, or they'll hear the word Hoss over and over again. They'll look around, and it sounds exactly like Patsy Cline.
When I had the chance in the late 80s to go, when my friend recorded with John Capps, we did kind of a tour of all the cool Elvis hotspots, and one of the stops we made was at Sun Records. And we were talking to one of the employees there, and I said, "Oh, this is cool and great place." He goes, "Yeah, you just don't want to be here at night." And I said,
"Really?
Why don't you want to be here at night?" And he said, "Man, I have heard some stuff that will curl your toes." He goes, "I've heard what I thought were full-on fights. I can hear men yelling at one another, the sound of somebody pounding on a piano. I go back in there, there's nothing, the lights are off." He goes, "I've heard it enough, I've been creeped out." And then he was talking about the one time when they were in there doing a tour, and they looked up, and there was a spirit that was standing there looking at them through the glass. And he said you could see right through it, and everybody in that little tour just stopped and stared, and then this thing just kind of faded out in front of them. Now, have you heard many stories like that about Sun Records? I mean, you had Carl Perkins, you had Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, Roy Orbison, quite a few major musicians, Jerry Lee Lewis, that went through Sun Records.
Sadly, I have not been able to locate a story about Sun Records until you told me that one. But my own experience there is, I went to Memphis, it was probably 15, 20 years ago, and I went to Sun Records, and the tour guide puts us in the middle of the room and starts to play Ring of Fire. I think it was Ring of Fire. No, I'm sorry, it was I Walk the Line. And I got such a chill there that if, Elvis tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, man," I wouldn't have batted an eye. And so I really felt when I was going to do these books that I was going to find some good stories, haunted stories about Sun Records, but I did not locate any, so I didn't use any there. Now, Elvis, the Ghost of Elvis, I do have a lot of his stories in there from Graceland, also from the Ryman. He's reported to haunt the Ryman as well, but I didn't find any from Sun Records.
Well, that's a good way to go out. Let's tell us about a couple of the favorites from the King. Although a lot of people think of him as the king of rock and roll, he also had his roots very deep into country music. What were some of the cooler stories you've heard about Elvis, even at Graceland?
Graceland, I found pretty fascinating because there's one story in particular that stands out. I talked a little bit about it in Haunted Rock and Roll. During the early days of right after Elvis died, they would allow tours for certain groups of fans. It's not like it was now where pretty much everyone that buys a ticket gets in.
Right.
But there was a group of fans that were taking a tour, and I think they may have been in the trophy room, and there was a couple with a young daughter, and the daughter, kind of left the tour, went on her own, and suddenly they couldn't find her, and everyone went into panic mode. They, pretty much closed the place down to try to find this girl. And they looked everywhere, and they figured she couldn't have gone too far. They actually found her at the meditation garden, where, of course, is where Elvis's grave is. And they were upset, and the little girl said, "Don't be upset. This man appeared. He was very nice. He was dressed all in white." And then she proceeds to pretty much describe Elvis. And she was definitely too young for the Elvis era. So that was one of the stories. There are other stories that Gladys haunts Graceland as well. That's Elvis's mom, apparently haunts the attic. And even right after she died, Elvis's grandmother claimed that she would hear boxes being moved upstairs in the attic of Graceland. And then later, Priscilla Presley, in a documentary, said that she had her own encounter. She went up there one night and felt the presence of Gladys as she was trying on some of Gladys's old clothes.
Cool stuff. The book is out and available. You can get copies by going onto Amazon.com. Ghosts of Country Music, Tales of Haunted Honky Tonks and Legendary Specters. I'd love to have you back with us, Matt, and we could talk about haunted colleges and some of the other work you've done. Would that be all right?
I would love to do that anytime. You let me know.
Will do. Tomorrow we're back. The Day Satan Called, a true encounter with demon possession and exorcism. Bill Scott will be our guest. For Tim Dennis, I'm Dave Schrader. You've been listening to the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Beyond the Darkness.